They found him alone in a frozen wasteland. No army, no flag, no hope left to fight for. Yet when the rescue team approached, he still stood at attention, uniform torn, face hollow, rifle in hand. His name was Hiroo Onoda, the Japanese soldier who refused to surrender for almost 30 years after World War II ended. For 3 decades, he lived in the jungle, convinced the war was still on. Rain, hunger, loneliness, none of it broke him. He had one mission: to never quit. When they finally told him the war had ended long ago, he didn't cry. He simply lowered his weapon, saluted, and said, "I was true to my duty." Most people hear that story and think he was crazy, but maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was one of the last men alive who truly understood what it means to rise from the ashes of defeat. Because that's the part no one talks about: what happens after you've lost everything. When you've fallen, faced yourself, and burned in your own fire. What comes next? Stay till the end of this video because you are about to find out what true resilience really looks like. I may not have amazing victories, but I can amaze you with the defeats I came out of alive. That line isn't about being humble. It's about surviving hell and walking out of it without losing your soul. Everyone loves a success story. The underdog who wins, the man who rises from nothing, the hero who defeats his demons and claims the crown. But no one tells you what happens before that victory. The sleepless nights, the self-doubt, the moments where you stare at the ceiling and wonder if any of it was even worth it. Here's the thing. Success looks glamorous when it's over. But while you're inside it, it feels like drowning. It feels like clawing at the walls just to breathe. Most people never talk about the fall because it's ugly, it's quiet, it's humiliating. It's the part where the crowd disappears and your confidence turns into a ghost. And yet that's where the real story begins. There's a moment every man faces. It might happen in a boardroom, or in a hospital waiting room, or in a dark bedroom at 3 a.m. It's that moment when everything you built starts to crumble and no one is coming to save you. For Marcus Aurelius, the great Roman emperor and philosopher, it came when his empire was rotting from within. His own generals were betraying him, plague was wiping out half his people, and his son, the one he hoped would carry his legacy, turned out to be everything he feared. He could have given up, blamed fate, blamed the gods, but instead he wrote. He reflected. He turned his suffering into Meditations, the book that still teaches people how to endure 2,000 years later. That's the thing about the fall. It doesn't destroy you unless you let it. It reveals who you are underneath everything you pretend to be. Let's bring it closer. Imagine a man who spent a decade building his career. He did everything right, studied hard, worked late, played by the rules. Then one morning, an email drops in his inbox. Your position has been eliminated. In an instant, his identity vanishes. No one calls him sir anymore. The phone stops ringing. He walks into his home, and even his family looks at him differently, not out of cruelty, but because they can feel his silence. He starts questioning everything. Was it all a lie? Was he ever good enough, or was he just lucky? That's the fall. Not the loss of a job, but the loss of self. And yet, somewhere inside that silence, a question starts to echo. What if this is not the end, but the beginning? Every great man you've ever admired, whether it's Epictetus, a slave who became a philosopher, or Viktor Frankl, a prisoner who found meaning in suffering, they all met their fall. And that's when they discovered something the world hides from you. Power is not found in control. It's found in surrender. Not surrender to others, but surrender to truth. The truth that you're not invincible. The truth that you can lose everything. The truth that you are temporary, and that's what makes your rise meaningful. There's a story about a samurai named Musashi. He fought over 60 duels undefeated. But that's not what made him legendary. What made him unforgettable was what happened after his last fight. He disappeared. He left the sword. He walked into the mountains, built a hut, and spent his final years writing the Book of 5 Rings. He realized that mastery wasn't about killing opponents. It was about mastering himself. That's what the fall teaches you, that everything external victory, validation, applause is temporary. But what you build inside yourself, that lasts forever. Most people avoid the fall because it bruises their ego. They chase validation, not evolution. They want to be seen winning, not caught learning. But the truth is, no one grows under the spotlight. Growth happens in the shadows. Think about the gym. You don't grow when you lift the weight. You grow when your muscle breaks, tears, and rebuilds stronger. That's what the fall does to your soul. It breaks you so you can rebuild differently. Here's a secret people don't say out loud. You will fail. You will be betrayed. You will be underestimated. And the ones you helped will forget you the moment you stop being useful. That's not cynicism, that's clarity. Because once you stop expecting fairness, you start building strength. You stop playing for approval and start playing for purpose. Every man thinks he's prepared for loss until it comes. Until that phone call, that breakup, that diagnosis, that betrayal. And then the world slows down. The walls close in. And you realize this is it. This is your fall. But here's what separates men who break from men who rise. Some stare at the wreckage and curse the world. Others start picking up the pieces. You don't need to win every battle. You just need to stay alive long enough to fight the next one. Because that's what the fall is, a test of endurance, not perfection. Let me give you another image. A blacksmith forging a sword. He heats it until it's red hot. Then he strikes, again and again. Each blow shapes it, strengthens it, hardens it. If the metal could speak, it would scream. It would call it torture. But when the fire cools, it's no longer just metal. It's a blade, a weapon, a legacy. That's what life does to you. You think you're breaking, but you're being forged. The fall strips away illusions. The illusion that you're special. The illusion that life owes you something. The illusion that comfort equals safety. Once those illusions burn away, you see the truth raw and unfiltered. You see that strength isn't about winning. It's about continuing when everything inside you says stop. It's about walking through the storm without asking when it will end. I'll tell you this, the fall hurts. It always does. But pain is not punishment. It's information. Pain says, this version of you can't survive where you're going. Pain says, something inside you has to change. And if you listen closely, it tells you exactly what that is. So when you fall, don't panic. Don't run. Don't numb it with distractions or drown it in noise. Sit in it. Look at it. Because inside that darkness is the blueprint of your next evolution. You're not being buried, you're being planted. And when the time comes, you'll rise again. Not as who you were, but as who you were meant to become. The fall doesn't end when you hit the ground. It ends when you finally stop running and look at yourself. That's the part most people avoid. The silence. The mirror. The truth staring back at them without filters, without excuses, without the armor they've been hiding behind for years. You see, pain itself doesn't destroy you. It's denial that does. It's pretending you're fine when you're falling apart inside. It's smiling in public while your soul bleeds in private. At some point, you have to stand still. And when you do, you meet the one person you've been escaping all along yourself. For most of us, that mirror moment doesn't come during peace. It comes after chaos. When the applause stops. When the noise fades. When no one is there to validate your existence. That's when you start hearing the truth whispering underneath the pain. And it says, you played a role, not yourself. You chased approval, not purpose. You lived on autopilot, not awareness. It's brutal, isn't it? Because now you can't blame the world anymore. You can't point fingers at fate, parents, society, or bad luck. Now it's just you and the man you've become. Let me tell you something about mirrors. They don't lie, but they also don't judge. They reflect. And sometimes that reflection shows the monster you've created in order to survive. The overachiever who never feels enough. The people pleaser who mistakes being liked for being loved. The perfectionist who's secretly terrified of being ordinary. The tough guy who hides his fear behind anger. Those are masks, survival instincts that worked once, but destroy you when you start believing they are you. The mirror doesn't ask, who are you to the world? It asks, who are you when the world stops watching? There's a story about Emperor Ashoka before he became known as Ashoka the Great. He was ruthless, hungry for power, undefeated in war. After one of his most brutal battles, he walked across the battlefield littered with corpses, men, women, children, and something broke. He saw his reflection in a pool of blood and realized the truth. He hadn't conquered kingdoms. He had conquered his own humanity. That was his mirror moment. He could have buried it under more wars, more victories, more noise. But he didn't. He faced it. And that reflection changed the course of history. He became a different kind of warrior, one who fought ignorance instead of people. That's what the mirror does. It destroys who you think you are so you can meet who you're meant to be. In modern life, our mirrors look different. They show up as failure, heartbreak, burnout, anxiety. They show up when your carefully built identity starts to crack. Maybe your mirror moment was losing a relationship you thought would last forever. Maybe it was realizing you spent 10 years climbing a ladder that was leaning against the wrong wall. Maybe it was looking at your reflection one morning and realizing you've become the person you once promised you'd never be. That's not tragedy. That's awakening. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. You either change or you spend the rest of your life pretending not to notice. The mirror doesn't show you perfection. It shows you patterns. Every mistake, every disappointment, every toxic cycle is trying to tell you something. If you keep dating the same kind of person, if every job leaves you empty, if every goal you achieve feels meaningless, it's not the world repeating itself. It's you. It's your unresolved wounds replaying themselves until you finally pay attention. And when you do, when you finally stop blaming the world and start asking, what am I doing to create this? That's when transformation begins. Here's what I've learned about the mirror. It doesn't reward comfort. It rewards honesty. You can't heal what you refuse to look at. You can't grow while pretending you already have. The mirror doesn't care about your image, your followers, your job title, or your reputation. It only cares about one thing: whether the person inside is still alive. And that's the hardest part. Because by the time most people look inward, they realize they've been living like ghosts, chasing approval, avoiding silence, addicted to distraction. But once you face yourself, you start to come back to life. Do you know why the mirror hurts? Because it shows you how small your fears actually are, and how powerful you could be if you stopped running from them. Think of every great figure in history who rose from chaos. Miyamoto Musashi, after winning every duel, faced the mirror and walked away from fame. Marcus Aurelius faced his mirror in solitude while leading a dying empire. Malcolm X faced his mirror in prison and walked out as a new man. Each time the mirror stripped away the mask. Each time a stronger, purer identity was born. There's something sacred about confronting yourself. When you stop lying, even to protect your pride. When you stop chasing things that don't feed your soul. When you finally accept that the man in the mirror is both your enemy and your teacher. That's when power returns. Not loud power, quiet power. The kind that doesn't need validation. The kind that walks into a room and changes the atmosphere without saying a word. Because you've already fought the hardest battle, the one inside your own mind. Most people will never face their mirror. They'll drown in distractions instead. They'll keep scrolling, keep talking, keep pretending. Because silence terrifies them. But the few who stare into it long enough to understand, they start to see patterns, meaning, and truth. They start to see that every fall was a message, every defeat a signal pointing toward who they could become. That's what awareness is, the light that burns through self-deception. When you finally meet your own eyes and don't look away, something shifts. You stop asking why life is unfair. You start asking, what is this trying to teach me? You stop running from pain. You start learning from it. And slowly, the reflection begins to change. Not because the world did, but because you did. You begin to see the strength behind the scars. You start to appreciate the man you've become. Not because he's perfect, but because he's real. You realize the mirror isn't there to shame you, it's there to free you. And once you've faced yourself, the world can no longer break you in the same way again. Because now you know who you are. Now you've met your own truth. The fall woke you up. The mirror teaches you how to stand. And the next step, that's where the fire begins. Every fall leaves ashes. And in those ashes, something waits the fire. You don't find it by accident, you build it. From friction, from pain, from truth. Pain doesn't vanish once you understand it. It lingers, It tests you. It whispers, prove it. That's where most people quit right after awareness before action. But awareness without action is paralysis. It's knowing the door is open but never walking through it. The fire begins when you finally move. Here's the thing about fire: it destroys, but it also forges. It burns away everything weak and unnecessary. It leaves behind only what can endure heat. That's why every powerful man you admire was shaped by it. Not the comfort of praise, but the crucible of pain. Let's look at a few. Thomas Edison failed over 1,000 times before the light bulb worked. But he never called them failures, he called them experiments. He said, "I didn't fail 1,000 times, I found 1,000 ways that didn't work." That's fire refusing to let defeat define you, using it instead as oxygen. Or think of Joan of Arc, a teenage girl who faced an army and an empire with nothing but conviction. She was mocked, imprisoned, burned alive, yet her fire lit a nation's spirit for centuries. That's not luck. That's soul forged in flames. Every man has his version of that fire. Maybe yours is the humiliation of being underestimated. Maybe it's rejection, maybe it's betrayal. Whatever it is, it's not there to destroy you, it's there to refine you. Fire teaches you to act without fear. Because once you've been burned, heat doesn't scare you anymore. You stop asking for comfort. You start asking for clarity. You stop chasing peace. You start creating power. Here's what happens after the mirror. You realize that all the pain you blamed the world for was actually the universe trying to wake you up. You lost people? Good, you learned who's real. You failed publicly? Good, you learned humility and hunger. You were betrayed? Good, you learned to stop handing loyalty to untested hands. That's the fire speaking. It burns away illusion. And what remains, that's you. A blacksmith doesn't complain about the fire. He knows the heat is the only way to shape metal into a sword. Likewise, your soul can't harden into strength without resistance. No one develops courage and comfort. No one builds endurance without exhaustion. No one earns wisdom without scars. You can read 100 books on psychology and philosophy, but nothing will teach you faster than life setting you on fire and watching how you react. Because in that moment, you don't think, you become. Some men, when burned, turn bitter. Others turn bright. Bitter men use pain as proof the world is cruel. Bright men use pain as proof they can endure anything. Bitterness keeps you chained to the past. Fire frees you from it. Think of a phoenix. Everyone knows it rises from ashes, but no one talks about the part where it burns itself first. It chooses the flames. It embraces the destruction because it knows it's the only path to rebirth. You have to become your own phoenix. You have to burn the version of yourself that depended on validation, approval, and comfort. You have to burn the fear that told you to play small. You have to burn the lie that survival is enough, because you weren't born just to survive. You were born to ignite. There's a moment during every transformation when you'll want to quit, when you'll say, "It's too much, it's not working." That's when you're closest to breaking through. The fire always gets hottest before the metal takes its final shape. When you feel like you can't take another step, remember this. You've already lived through worse. The storm didn't kill you, it revealed you. You've carried pain heavier than this, and you're still here. So push once more. Because persistence isn't about strength, it's about refusal. Refusal to die where you fell. Refusal to let pain end the story before the rise. Here's something people rarely say out loud. The fire never fully goes out. Once you've walked through it, it stays inside you. You learn to live with the heat. You carry it like a heartbeat, steady, dangerous, alive. That's what makes you magnetic. People feel it when you walk in. They can sense the quiet intensity, the discipline, the unspoken awareness that you've been through things they can't imagine, and you didn't break. That's why fire-forged men are different. They don't chase power. They are power. At work, they're the ones who keep calm when everyone else panics. In relationships, they don't beg to be loved, they attract it by being grounded. In life, they don't talk about discipline, they embody it. They've learned that emotion is energy, and anger, sadness, or fear can be transformed into fuel. Turn anger into focus. Turn heartbreak into purpose. Turn fear into preparation. That's the alchemy of fire. Here's a practical truth. You don't need motivation. You need movement. You don't need inspiration. You need repetition. Fire feeds on consistency, not bursts of passion, but daily sparks showing up, even when no one's watching. When you start living like that, pain stops being your enemy. It becomes your coach. Every failure becomes feedback. Every scar becomes proof. One day, you'll look back at the things that once broke you and you'll smile. Because now you understand what they were doing. They were burning off your weakness. They were clearing space for strength. The same flame that once scared you now lights your path. The same rejection that once hurt you now drives your ambition. The same fear that once controlled you now obeys you. You've stopped being a victim of circumstance. You've become the creator of meaning. And here's the final truth about fire: it's contagious. Once you start burning with purpose, you light up others. People see it. They feel it. They either run from you or rise with you. That's how men change the world, not by preaching, but by burning so brightly that others remember what light feels like. You survived the fall. You faced the mirror. You built the fire. And now it's time to rise. There's a moment after every storm when the air changes. The sky clears. The silence feels different. And you realize you're not who you were. The fire didn't just burn what was weak. It revealed what was real. It stripped away your illusions until all that remained was truth. That's when the rise begins. The rise is quiet. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare or applause. It starts in small decisions: the way you wake up, the way you think, the way you speak to yourself. You stop begging life to be easy. You start asking yourself to be stronger. You stop chasing meaning. You start creating it. And slowly, without even realizing it, you begin to move differently. Your posture changes. Your eyes hold steadiness instead of confusion. Your silence starts speaking louder than your words. That's when people start noticing, but by then, their opinion doesn't matter anymore. See, the rise isn't about getting back to who you were. It's about becoming who you should have been all along. The fall stripped away illusions. The mirror showed you truth. The fire built your strength. Now, the rise is about integration, making all of it one. The lesson becomes lifestyle. The pain becomes wisdom. The scars become armor. Here's what most people don't understand. You don't rise because life suddenly gets easier. You rise because you stop waiting for it to. You stop needing closure. You stop chasing fairness. You stop expecting the world to reward your good intentions. Instead, you focus on what you can control: your thoughts, your habits, your energy, your response. And that changes everything. Let's look at a man who understood this better than most: Marcus Garvey. He was ridiculed, betrayed, imprisoned. The world tried to silence him. But even from behind bars, he kept building his movement, kept writing, kept teaching. Because his rise was never external. It was internal, unstoppable, self-created. He once said, "If you have no confidence in self, you are twice defeated in the race of life." That's the essence of the rise: confidence born not from success, but from survival. When you rise, you start seeing life differently. You no longer measure people by their words, you measure them by their discipline. You no longer crave attention, you crave purpose. You no longer fear solitude, you crave clarity. You realize solitude is not loneliness, it's leadership training. It's where kings are built, where warriors reset, where creators hear their own thoughts without the world's noise. There's a shift that happens inside you. You start taking ownership, complete ownership. Every problem becomes a project. Every obstacle becomes an opportunity to refine your focus. You stop saying, "Why me?" and start saying, "Try me." You stop saying, "I hope," and start saying, "I will." You stop chasing motivation and start relying on consistency. This is when life starts to bend around you. Not because the world changed, but because your energy did. Let me tell you something about energy. Powerful energy doesn't shout. It doesn't need validation. It's grounded, composed, and certain. People feel it in the way you stand, the way you look them in the eye, the way you stay calm when others lose control. That's real strength, not aggression, not dominance, but mastery. The kind of power that comes from knowing you can destroy, but choosing to build. Look at men like Miyamoto Musashi or Leonardo da Vinci or Nikola Tesla. Each of them spent long stretches of time in solitude, creating, refining, obsessing, mastering their craft. They weren't chasing approval. They were shaping worlds from within. Musashi's sword was an extension of his mind. Da Vinci's art was a reflection of his endless curiosity. Tesla's inventions were manifestations of vision few could understand. They weren't waiting for opportunities. They became opportunities. That's what rising looks like when your discipline turns into gravity, pulling everything you desire toward you. The rise doesn't make you fearless. It makes you unstoppable despite fear. Fear never disappears, it just becomes background noise. You feel it, acknowledge it, and move anyway. That's what separates power from potential. Potential dreams. Power acts. And once you learn that your life stops being about survival, it becomes about creation. At this stage, people will start calling you lucky. They'll see the outcomes, not the ashes you crawled out of. They'll call you gifted, not knowing how much you bled for those gifts to take shape. Let them talk. Their misunderstanding is part of your evolution. Because now, you don't need to explain your journey. You embody it. When you rise, life tests you differently. Not with chaos, but with choice. It's easy to fight when you're cornered. But can you stay disciplined when you have comfort? Can you stay grounded when you're winning? Can you stay humble when everyone's watching? That's the real test of mastery. Not how you handle pain, but how you handle power. The rise gives you balance. You start living in alignment with truth, not ego. You learn when to speak and when to stay silent, when to fight and when to walk away, when to lead and when to let others lead. Because now you understand real strength is control, not chaos. Power isn't about domination, it's about direction. You begin shaping your environment. At work, you stop waiting for permission and start creating progress. In relationships, you stop demanding love and start embodying it. In life, you stop reacting, you start architecting. The world begins to bend in subtle ways. Opportunities align, right people appear, momentum builds. Not by luck, but because you finally become a match for what you desire. There's a calm confidence that comes with the rise. You no longer panic over uncertainty because you've walked through worse. You don't seek revenge because the best revenge is elevation. You don't chase validation because you are validation. Every step forward becomes a declaration. I am not defined by what happened to me. I am defined by how I responded to it. And the more you walk this path, the more you realize the climb never really ends. Each rise leads to a new mountain. But now, that doesn't scare you. It excites you. Because mountains are no longer obstacles. They're invitations. Invitations to grow, to test, to prove. That's how warriors live, not for comfort, for conquest not of others, but of self. You've faced your darkness. You've found your fire. You've earned your rise. Now you don't follow paths, you leave them behind for others to follow. That's what legacy is, when your strength becomes someone else's permission to start again. And that brings us to the final part, the mark you leave behind. When the noise dies down, when the victories fade, when even your memories begin to blur, only one thing remains the mark you leave behind. Not the trophies, not the followers, not the praise. The mark is invisible to most, but it's felt everywhere you've been. The way you looked someone in the eye when they were breaking. The way you stood your ground when others bent. The way you refused to give up when life dared you to quit. That is the mark. You see, survival alone isn't legacy. Anyone can survive. But to rise again and again, that changes the world around you. Your story becomes proof. Proof that defeat isn't the end. Proof that pain isn't punishment. Proof that darkness doesn't mean death. Every scar becomes a message written not in words but in endurance. Every failure becomes a footprint that someone else will one day follow out of their own despair. That's how legacies are built, not through perfection, but through perseverance. Think about Marcus Aurelius. He didn't set out to be remembered. He simply lived with integrity during chaos. And centuries later, his private thoughts became scripture for strength. Or take Harriet Tubman, hunted, beaten, betrayed, yet she kept going back, again and again, to lead others through the dark. Her mark wasn't carved in marble, it was carved in courage. History remembers those who refuse to stay broken. And so will the people who cross your path. Your mark doesn't require fame, it requires depth. It's the quiet way you move through the world, steady, grounded, aware. It is the silence that follows you because people can feel your story, even if you never tell it. That's why men forged in fire rarely speak of it. They don't need to. Their presence says enough. You can sense when someone has been to hell and returned with light. They look at you differently. They listen differently. They carry no arrogance, no need to prove. Only clarity, the kind that can't be faked. At this stage, purpose becomes simple. You no longer chase more, you refine what matters. You start mentoring without realizing it. You start protecting without asking for credit. You start inspiring without trying. Because real power doesn't seek followers. It creates leaders. Here's the truth most never grasp. The mark you leave is not a monument. It's a movement, a ripple that starts with your choices. When you discipline yourself, someone watching learns strength. When you forgive instead of hate, someone nearby learns peace. When you rise instead of retreat, someone unseen learns hope. Every action teaches. Every response echoes. You never know who's watching, but someone always is. That's why authenticity matters. Because the world doesn't need more perfect people, it needs more honest ones. The fire inside you is not meant to stay contained. It's meant to spread, not to destroy, but to illuminate. Light is contagious. Discipline is contagious. Courage is contagious. You become the spark that reminds others of their own fire. And in that way, your mark multiplies. But understand this legacy isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the father who shows up every day, no matter how exhausted he is. Sometimes it's the friend who tells you the truth you didn't want to hear. Sometimes it's the man who rebuilds his life quietly after losing everything, no drama, no pity, just quiet persistence. That's what power looks like in real life, not noise, consistency. Every generation needs examples. Not gods, not heroes, examples of ordinary men who chose to become extraordinary by refusing to give up. That's your role now. Not to impress the world, but to embody what it forgot: discipline, honor, patience, purpose. Because when you stand for something real in a world built on illusions, you become unshakable. And when you become unshakable, others find stability through you. That's leadership in its purest form. Remember how this story began. You didn't come here with amazing victories. You came here with defeats, and you turned them into proof that you could not be destroyed. You may never be known by millions, but you will be remembered by the ones who saw you rise, by the ones you helped without realizing it, by the ones who found courage watching you endure. And one day when your time ends, the world won't just say you lived. It will say you left something behind. A trail of strength, a map of resilience, a reminder that greatness isn't about winning it, it's about staying in the fight until the final breath. So walk forward, not as who you were, not as who you tried to be, but as who you've become. A man of clarity, a man of fire, a man of rise. Let your silence speak volumes. Let your presence teach. Let your scars shine as proof that pain can be turned into power. Because in the end, that's all the world really needs, not another perfect story, but another living example of what survival, awareness, and purpose look like when they finally unite. That is your mark. There's a kind of victory no one celebrates. No cheering crowd, no headlines, no applause. It's the victory that happens in silence when you wake up one more morning you didn't want to see, when you choose to forgive instead of hate, when you walk away instead of proving your worth to people who never deserve to witness it. That's the rise no one talks about, the rise that happens inside, where no one can steal it. One day, you'll realize your story was never about winning. It was about enduring. It was about standing up every time life asked if you still could. So if no one told you today, you already made it. You survived what was meant to destroy you, and that makes you unstoppable. Watch this again whenever you forget. And remember, the world doesn't change when you conquer it. It changes the moment you refuse to be conquered by it.